So toast.
Toast.
You like toast?
Let's do it.
All right.
I haven't looked at the index. Is there a good old index entry on toast?
Support for Trifles comes from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon and Substack. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/trifles and at trifles.substack.com. And now you can enjoy some Trifles swag, mugs, notepads, and oval stickers, available in our store. Find it at ihearofsherlock.com/merchandise.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the beaches were copper, the pince-nez was golden, and the blaze was silver, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about the difference between Holmes's pipes? Or how often he smoked cigars versus cigarettes? Or what Egyptian cigarettes are like?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 484, Toast. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, cheers.
Cheers.
That's my toast.
Oh, that's great. Wait a minute. I've got a saltine here somewhere. I'll crack that right back at you.
Munch down on it. Well, this is it's going to be an interesting episode, not one that we had in planning for quite some time. As a matter of fact, it came up because I've been coming down with something lately, and I felt the need for a little simple comfort food. And in doing so, I made myself a couple of slices of cinnamon toast with butter. Just one of those things that harkens back to childhood, where you toast the bread up perfectly, spread the butter on, and sprinkle it with a little cinnamon and sugar. And it's a warm feeling. But it got me to thinking about toast in Sherlock Holmes's time. How would toast have been made? How prominent was it? And in which stories might we find toast? Well, gather up your crumb catchers, kids. We're going to be talking all about toast in the canon in this episode. First, a little bit of housekeeping. If you wouldn't mind hitting the subscribe button wherever you happen to follow us, could be on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Maybe it's on YouTube. Or maybe you've signed up on one of our websites like SherlockHolmesPodcast.com or on Patreon or on Substack. All of those places ensure that you get notified when our latest episode comes out and gives you a chance in some cases to get the inside scoop, to get material that no one else gets unless you are a supporter of the show. And the great news is, if you are a supporter on Substack or on Patreon, you have an opportunity to win a prize every month. We put all of the names of all of our supporters into a drawing at the end of the month and randomly pull out a name, and you get a free copy of the back issue of the Baker Street Journal if we pick your name. So if you'd like to support the show, make this possible, and you'd like an opportunity to win a prize, well, feel free to jump in. We thank you. Okay, well, yeah, I'm coming down with something. It must be a spring cold, I think.
Oh, that's awful.
But if I can't have saltines with my chicken noodle soup, well, then I'll have a nice side of cinnamon toast. And to me, before we get into the history and background of toast, to me, toast, it's one of my earliest childhood memories. You know, having a simple meal Well, not that it's a meal. Maybe a simple snack like toast, having poached eggs on toast. These are things I remember from my childhood. And toast seemed to be a way of Mom saying, "I care about you."
Oh, well, that's very nice. I must say I have no childhood memories of toast at all, but maybe that's because my mother was indifferent to me. I don't know.
Well, what's your earliest memory of toast? If we can go down this Freudian
toast. Well, doctor, I think my earliest memory of toast is probably, I don't know, Sunday. I think, no, it was maybe last Wednesday.
Perfect. You go way back. That's good.
I don't really.
Good.
I can't say that I have any memory. Well, actually, I take that back. What I remember is when I first became aware of a toast rack. Looking probably at, a program like Downton Abbey or some wonderful old recreation of a classic English breakfast. And then, of course, when I was in London, I remember I would stay at one hotel. Well, it wasn't really a hotel. It was sort of a bed and breakfast. But they actually had toast racks out. And so I thought to myself, how wonderful to get a toast rack. But, a toast rack is completely impractical because what it does is it hastens the cooling of your toast. And so you wind up with toast that isn't warm, and therefore the butter doesn't melt really as well, and it's not quite as pleasant. But on the other hand, it's a nice organizing thing for a breakfast table, certainly that.
Well, and we'll talk a little bit about the history of toast, but I did want to stick on this subject of toast racks because, as you probably know, if you take toast out of the toaster and set it down on your plate, well, you end up with soggy toast because the steam that accumulates underneath the toast causes the bread to, I believe the scientific term is, sog out. And the toast rack allows you to store those slices vertically, so the heat rises away from the surface of the toast. Now, what I like to do is I like to get my toast right out of the toaster, put the butter on it, and then slap it down in the toast rack, so it's already pre-buttered by the time I get to it at the table.
Well, then it'll still be cold.
Well, true. I mean, this reminds me of a wonderful letter from America that Alistair Cook wrote. He said, from the day I settled permanently in this country, I naturally tried to do in Rome as the Romans did. Of course, Alistair Cook came from England, settled in America. And he said, when in my early days at Yale, I wondered if there might be a toast rack handy, the nice English professor I was breakfasting with very gently, almost confidentially told me, they don't exist. It was many years before I read Mark Twain's response when on his first visit to England, he encountered a toast rack. And Twain writes, in the heyday of the Industrial Revolution, it took the mechanical genius of the English to devise a receptacle which guaranteed to deliver in the shortest possible time toast that was both cold and hard.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty good. I like the Twain quote. Well, that is interesting. Yeah, toast racks have never been an American thing. But it's interesting, if you look at the background and history of toast, Mrs. Beeton is a good place to go. Now, this isn't Beeton's Christmas annual, but it is the same name, Beeton. Mrs. Beeton had a cookery book, a book of household management in the middle 19th century that was very famous. And the publishing company that was surrounding all of that wound up being sold, I think, to Ward Locke, and that's how Mrs. Beeton's Christmas Christmas Annual, not Mrs. Beeton's, but Beeton's Christmas Annual, Beetons, became sort of a Ward Locke property. And I think Ward Locke may still, if Ward Locke still exists, they were publishing the cookery book that, of course, predated Ward Locke's involvement, which was Mrs. Beeton's middle 19th century book of household management. Anyway, if you look in there, I think it's like 1861, there's a recipe for a toast sandwich.
Oh.
And this is exciting. You might want to get your pencils ready. Listeners, it consists of a thin slice of cold, dry toast placed between two thin slices of bread and butter seasoned with pepper and salt. It is recommended as a simple, appetizing meal for invalids or for people who aspire to be invalids.
That's impressive that they got all three British spices in there.
Yeah, isn't that
salt,
isn't that
pepper,
something?
and butter. Yeah.
Yeah. And Mrs. Beaton also had, I think, a recipe for hot buttered toast, which was take household bread 2 days old, toast it before a bright fire, butter it on both sides, and then trim it and cut. So I guess you cut the crusts off. Oh, and then the famous toast and water. This is a drink made by, this is unbelievable, a drink by toasting a crust of bread until very brown and hard, but not burned, and place it in a jug and pour a quart of boiling water over it, allowing it to cool.
Goodness.
And then last, toasted cheese, which is really Welsh rarebit. But you take some melted cheese and butter and mustard and pepper, serve that over hot buttered toast. And, there you are. What more could you want?
Well, I'll give you a little more because it comes from where we find the earliest official piece of toasting equipment. Now these days we're used to an electric toaster where there's just a couple of slots and you put the bread in and press the button down, and a few minutes later you have your toast according to your light or dark specifications. But before toasters existed and before particular racks existed, there was the toasting fork. And this goes way back. We'll explain about the literary beginnings of the toasting fork. But before we do that, I want to offer the bridge here with Victorian chef Alexis Soyer's instructions from A Shilling Cookery for the People from 1854. How to toast bread. Procure a nice square loaf that had been baked 1 or 2 days previously, and with a sharp knife, cut off the bottom crust evenly. It's very similar to Mrs. Beaton here. And then as many slices as you require, about 1/4 of an inch in thickness. Contrive to have a clear fire. Place a slice of bread upon the toasting fork, about 1 inch from one of the sides. Hold it a minute before the fire, then turn it. Hold it for another minute, by which time the bread will be thoroughly hot. Then begin to move it gradually to and fro until the whole surface has assumed a yellowish-brown color. Then turn it again, toasting the other side in the same manner. Lay it then upon a hot plate. Have some fresh or salt butter, which must not be too hard, as pressing it upon the toast would make it heavy. Spread a piece, rather less than 1 ounce, over, and cut the toast into 4 or 6 pieces. You will then have toast made to perfection. I never thought you needed an actual recipe for toast, but there it is.
Yeah, the instructions are very good.
Yeah.
Well, toast has popped up interestingly in different ways over the years. I remember, that I always was a big fan of Bob and Ray. These are 2 radio comedians, Bob Elliott and Ray Goulding, who started up in Massachusetts and who had a lot of fun with radio comedy. They did shows all the time on New York radio stations like WOR. Anyway, one of their recurring bits was a soap opera spoof that they did, a radio program called Mary Backstage, Noble Wife, which was a spoof, of course, on Mary Noble Backstage Wife, which was a real soap opera on the radio in the 1940s or 50s. Anyway, Mary Backstage, Noble Wife. This is Bob and Ray do all the voices, and they are a little family of sort of goofy people who are involved in the theater. The famous actor Harry Backstage, but they're not making enough money, so they decide they'd like to get into a franchised restaurant, and they open up the House of Toast. And the House of Toast is where you can drive up and order your toast buttered on the near side or buttered on the far side. And one of their signature shakes. They always had a mystery shake, which I think was something like a prune shake or something like that. Whole wheat buttered on the near side, And of course, this occupied. It was back in the 1970s. This occupied a lot of time, and it was a great successor to their other great freelance business, which I think was washing shoelaces. The idea was you would bring your shoes over, or you would walk in one of their shoelace shops or whatever, and they would happily remove your shoelaces, carefully wash and iron them, and then give them back to you.
Goodness. Clearly, they were inspired by the International House of Pancakes.
International House of Toast.
I've never.
The International House of Toast. They must have croissant. Yeah.
Oh, wait, that's true. That would have been great.
And scones.
I'd go there.
Yeah, me too.
There seemed to have been a restaurant in New York back in the mid 2000s, I think, called Toast, Buttered Toast, maybe. It didn't last very long, but that was the concept. Well, anyway, let's talk quickly about the history of toast. The toasting fork, as we mentioned, was something that would have predated the actual toaster. Toasting fork, it's a long-handled fork with either 2 or 3 tines on it. You may have seen maybe a Dr. Seuss illustration of, oh goodness, I can't remember which character. Maybe Sam from Green Eggs and Ham, holding a hot dog over a fire with a what looked like a toasting fork. But these date back to at least the mid-16th century. And we know that they were at least well known by the public because in no less than 2 Shakespearean plays do we have references to toasting forks. There's King John, Act 4, Scene 3. Put up thy sword, betime, or I'll so maul you and your toasting iron. And then again in Henry V, swords and toasting forks are compared when a Corporal Nym says, I dare not fight, but I will wink and hold out mine iron. It is a simple one. It will toast cheese and will endure cold as another man's sword will. So there's William Shakespeare securing the future for toasting forks in 2 plays. My goodness. Well, that is very interesting. Yeah.
The only literary reference I could really find about toast was in a poem. Well, it's not really a poem. It is a long poem. It's called, I think, A Letter to Maria Gisborne or something like that. Yeah, Maria Gisborne from by Shelley. And there's just a little passage in the middle of this very long opus here. Though we eat little flesh and drink no wine, yea, let's be merry. We'll have tea and toast, custards for supper, and an endless host of syllabubs and jellies and mince pies, and other such ladylike luxuries, feasting on which we will philosophize. So there's tea and toast. At least it got Shelley's attention.
Yeah. Well, at some point along the way, in Victorian times, we moved along from the toasting fork to an actual toast plate, which was a cast iron rack that could sit in front of a coal-powered range cooker. It almost looks like what you would use for to prop up a book. Right? It would be at an angle, and you would lean your bread up against that and toast one side, and then flip it over and toast the other. And whether you're using a toast plate like that or a toasting fork, these are methods of making toast that require a lot of attention. And as you can imagine, toast would be the last thing you'd want to make before serving a meal, particularly breakfast. And so you wouldn't be able to give as much attention to putting the fine touches on your scrambled eggs if you're busy turning your toast. So it becomes a little more difficult at that point. So over time, I think it was in the early 1900s or so, we began to see the evolution of what we now know as toasters, where you would have a device, and ultimately it became electric. You would have heating coils inside, and you have little slots that you can insert your bread, fold down the sides, and once again, it would be a one-sided toast deal. You'd have to flip them over halfway through. But that early evolution of toasters was around 1905, 1913, in that era. Right? So we have to imagine when Mrs. Hudson is making toast in Baker Street, it would have been something that she would have been doing on her stove, in front of a coal-fired stove or a wood-fired stove. Would be very rudimentary in her creation.
Well, this sounds like it's, completely appropriate considering the high degree of manual activity required to do this, and perhaps the number of people. It could be that one person isn't enough, that you need a support person there to be doing something. But, it's perfectly appropriate considering the amount of manual labor that was required in Mrs. Hudson's kitchen.
Indeed. Well, let's see where Mrs. Hudson's kitchen takes us. I recently wrote up a piece on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere about eggs. And I found, I created 9 quotes from the canon where eggs were brought up. And people had to identify which stories they came from. But there was not toast with every instance of eggs. But that's partly what got me to thinking about toast. So there are fewer places in the Sherlock Holmes stories where we find toast than we find eggs. And one might say that, when one does find toast, there is an inference of eggs. So there may be even more mentions of eggs without eggs explicitly being mentioned.
Yeah. Well, toast and eggs, it's a feature of Sherlock Holmes. We occasionally talk, and we've done in the past a whole series of episodes on things like eating at Baker Street and Sherlock Holmes and food and things like that. But if you look for toast in the canon, you can find a couple of, more than a couple of references. Most of them are usually around Sherlock Holmes and breakfast. So the first one is in A Study in Scarlet. And this is early on in the case. Holmes and Watson have moved in together. Watson has compiled his list of Sherlock Holmes and his limitations. Watson tells us it was on the 4th of March, and so I have good reason to remember that I rose somewhat earlier than usual and found that Sherlock Holmes had not yet finished his breakfast. The landlady had become so accustomed to my late habits that my place had not been laid or my coffee prepared. And so Watson rings the bell and picks up a magazine, and while he's waiting, he notices that Holmes is munching silently, as only Holmes can do. How do you munch silently? At his toast. And then, of course, Watson reads an article in the magazine, and it turns out Holmes has written it, and they have this discussion about deducing things from a drop of water. But there's Holmes having toast, and it's not the last time we will find Holmes eating toast for breakfast.
No, indeed. It follows us to the short stories. The very first short story that appeared in the Strand, A Scandal in Bohemia, what is referred to as Chapter 3. That's an interesting little development. 3 chapters within A Scandal in Bohemia, even though it was a short story. Watson, and this is, of course, after they found the hiding place of the photograph at Bryony Lodge, home of Irene Adler, and she followed them home. Watson said, "I slept at Baker Street that night, and we were engaged upon our toast and coffee in the morning when the King of Bohemia rushed into the room." So no mention of eggs in that case. This was just toast and coffee.
No. But you're missing the important point there, which is the dialogue. And the king says, "You have really got it," he cried. Holmes says, "Yes, I do. Toast?" And then, of course, they give the king, a small slice of toast.
No marmalade for His Majesty.
No.
Where else do we find someone with toast in their mouth?
Well, again, it's Sherlock Holmes in the Valley of Fear. And, this is sort of well into the case. And Holmes is, Holmes has been pursuing this dumbbell. Now, not Watson as dumbbell, but an actual physical dumbbell. And they have this little conversation about, Watson, is it possible you've not penetrated the fact that the case hangs upon the missing dumbbell? Well, they have this. He makes a little fun of Watson, and then Watson tells us Holmes sat with his mouth full of toast, and his eyes sparkling with mischief, watching my intellectual entanglement. And he says, the mere sight of his excellent appetite, was an assurance of success, for I had very clear recollections of days and nights without a thought of food when his baffled mind had chafed. So here Holmes is feeling good, having his toast and mischief sparkling in his eyes.
How do you like that?
Yeah.
That's some good toast. And let's see, I think the final instance of toast we find all the way at the end of the count. Isn't this interesting? The very first story, The Study in Scarlet, and the very last story, The Retired Colorman, find us with toast. Of course, it is the day after heading to Albert Hall to hear Karina sing. And Watson tells us, in the morning, I was up betimes, but some toast crumbs and 2 empty eggshells told me that my companion was earlier still. And I found a scribbled note upon the table. How sad is that? Broken eggshells, toast crumbs, and a scribbled note.
Yeah. Note that says, Watson, please clean this mess up.
No one likes toast crumbs left about.
Yeah.
So there it is. Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, Breakfast at Baker Street, toast and the history thereof.
Yeah. You can't ask more than that. And be sure your toast is buttered on the right side. And if it falls on the floor, make sure it falls with the buttered side up. Would you please? Thank you.
And if you really want to test scientific theory, because we know that cats always land on their feet, strap a piece of buttered toast to the back of a cat and see which end lands up.
Yeah.
The cat may be stuck in limbo for a while there. But either way, it's just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Let's have some breakfast. And then go out together and see what we can do.
I feel as if I shall need your company and moral support today.